Hello, it's Ted Corliss with News Munchies and the Corliss-Barfield Trial Group. I've lived in Tampa since 1998 when I moved here from Missouri. During that time period, I've had an opportunity to get a close relationship with a number of individuals that represent people in the Florida Legislature. Just a few hours ago, I got off the phone with several individuals in Tallahassee who were discussing House Bill 1397. 1397 is the medical marijuana bill that is being considered following the adoption of Amendment 2 in November of 2016. Let me give you context. November was when the state of Florida overwhelmingly passed by 71% Amendment 2, which created a constitutional right for individuals in the state of Florida to consume marijuana for medical purposes. Now, during the last several months, legislators have been hard at work designing a bill that will create the legislative architecture for the production, distribution, and consumption of medical marijuana. The details are vast, and an enormous amount of distractions have been created by individuals who it appears to me to be interested in putting poison pills in the process. What is our objective as Floridians when it comes to medical marijuana? Well, we're balancing the interests of individuals that can benefit medically by using marijuana for pain or other treatments with the interest of controlling it so that it doesn't get in the hands of individuals who shouldn't be consuming it, namely children. Now, I want to go through some of the details for the purpose of not only educating you about the status of the bill, but also providing counsel to legislators right now who are going to be on the floor of the House and the Senate next week discussing and debating the individual details. Let's begin with the biggest issue that has now appears to be out of the way. And that is the original bill that was signed by Representative Rodriguez was a bill that contained a restriction on smoking, vaping, or eating medical cannabis. Now, when I say restriction, it means that the legislature was introducing the idea that you could purchase medical marijuana, but under no circumstances could that marijuana be something that you could smoke, something that you could vaporize in common vaporizers that are common in tobacco, or edibles where you would eat the marijuana to ingest the THC and the CBD. Well, just what the hell are you supposed to do with it was going to be my question until I found out that that part appears to have come out of the House bill and was never in the Senate bill. But let's address that issue because it's important if that issue comes back up again. You're absolutely right. There's a variety of ways that you can consume THC. Well, let me illustrate one. This is a vaporizer pen. You probably have seen these whenever you've purchased tobacco products or near tobacco products, and it contains an oil that when you draw comes out, looks like smoke. It's not smoke. This is a vaporizing product. There's an enormous amount of limitations associated with vaporizing. Namely, the amount that you consume is going to vary wildly based upon who produced the oil. Additionally, these individual devices tend to clog and can be very frustrating for consumers. But more importantly, if you're working under the direction of a physician, which of course is how you have to purchase it and use it in the state of Florida, this is an extremely ineffective way to accomplish that. And the reason for that is that with all medications, the true issue is the amount of dosage that you can get. Now, see, if you go to states where you can, in fact, smoke and vape, the doctor and the patient can determine the amount to be consumed. The problem with this is less than one pill that you might take of THC that has 100 milligrams. This has 400 milligrams, but it would take you approximately 250 draws to be able to consume that amount of vaporized product. Then there's the issue of edibles. Originally, the bill said, and up until a couple of hours ago, the bill said that you couldn't eat cannabis. Well, is cannabis a good thing to be eating? Well, for a lot of people, they prefer eating cannabis in the form of candies, gummy bears, or chocolates because they just do not want to smoke. And I respect those kinds of boundaries. Edibles is a more effective way to be able to consume cannabis, except for the fact that every individual that consumes cannabis by eating it tends to have their own unique experience. Some people find that it's easy to, quote, over-medicate, and they become super high associated with eating it. And the high associated with eating it takes longer to get into and much longer to get out of. And so for a lot of people who are regular consumers, edibles are not an effective way to consume it, especially if you have a disease such as cancer, where you have to avoid issues associating with vomiting. If you are in fact vomiting, you can't eat cannabis, because if you eat it to get rid of the vomiting, you might very well just throw it up. Which means that if you can't smoke it and you can't vape it effectively, and eating it causes more problems or doesn't work because you throw it up, it would technically mean the only other way that you could gain access to it, and I'm not making this up, is through the use of genital suppositories. That's right, literally taking the product in a form that could be inserted into the female vagina so that she could absorb it. In fact, there are products out on the market that include THC and CBD in tampons and other feminine hygiene products. I'm pretty certain that the designers of this bill are not interested in creating a mechanism for consuming cannabis that would require you to spray it on your genitals, which, by the way, does not work for men. It only works for women. And we're having these conversations about complicated vaping or unpredictable edibles or suppositories because the real issue here is the idea that people in Florida do not want you smoking pot under any circumstances, and even if it's under the supervision of a physician. If that's what you believe the boundaries should be, that individuals that are consuming cannabis should be subject to the whims of a state regulator and not under the supervision of a licensed physician, then this bill works marvelously for you. It doesn't work for me because I do not believe that you should restrict access to smoking it, and here's why. Smoking cannabis is the most conservative manner of introducing THC and cannabinoids into your system. It produces the least amount of introduction of THC, but provides you the ability to control it by smoking more. And because smoking contains higher doses of THC, you don't have to worry about the limitations associated with these kinds of vaping devices. A lot of people like vaping. And the thing about vaping is a lot of people find that vaping makes them ill. Why? Because vaping is the way that you ingest the most powerful doses if that's what you want. That's because there would be, under state law, the ability to generate an oil that is literally 99.99% THC. And so if you were to vape that, you would immediately become ill. Now, it won't kill you. In fact, you'd have to eat or smoke or vape about 5 pounds. That's 5 pounds of this. This is less than a half a gram of oil. So we'd be talking about a container big enough you'd have to have both hands out to hold it, and you'd have to consume it all at once. There appears to me to be a lot of misinformation, and that may be because the bills that are making their way through the legislature have enormous pieces of them that were written by opponents of Amendment 2. Try and consume that. You pass a bill in the state of Florida by 71% telling people that they have a constitutional right to consume cannabis. then to find out that the bill that is passing its way through the legislature was written by the very opponents to the bill who had talked about doing anything they can to hamstring access to cannabis. Mission accomplished. We have now created in this bill the most restrictive cannabis bill in the United States. Now, as of last week, when West Virginia adopted medical cannabis, we are now at 30 out of 50 states that are saying that they want medically available marijuana. Okay, so what would that mean? It would mean that the state of Florida would not provide reasonable access to this, either through smoking or vaping or eating it. And then what would happen is there's an enormous marketplace for it. And that marketplace can be filled by going to other states to purchase it. Imagine how easy it would be if you wanted to introduce cannabis or oils from other states when you could buy it virtually anywhere in the United States, either legally or in gray markets. So what that means is whatever tax benefits you ever believed that would exist in the state of Florida selling cannabis either are going to go away or are going to be severely limited. Well, I thought Republicans believed in ideas of open marketplace, limited government, states' rights, personal responsibility. Those sound like Republican virtues to me. But I don't see those virtues in any of these bills. Instead, I see a legislature who some members appear to be out of touch with the 71% of the population that is telling them they want cannabis. This bill is too restrictive, limiting access to smoking pot, when in fact that is the core of what this conversation is about. I suspect the reason they don't want that is because they think that smokable cannabis, flower cannabis, is more easily transferred to other people who aren't supposed to consume it. Well, no. Edibles are the easiest because you can simply take them out of the package, repackage them in any way you want, and you could put them in an envelope and mail them to your closest friend in another state. Or you could give them to other people in the state. They're the most difficult to regulate. Cannabis is undeniable if you look at it as a flower. It is what it is. This can be just about anything either. Hell, it's amber colored and it has the consistency of maple syrup. You could fill a maple syrup bottle with it and walk around the state pouring people portions of it. So they're going the wrong direction. They're trying to limit access to smoking it when in fact the most dangerous forms, if there is even a danger, and there really isn't, are found in edibles or in the concentrates that would be legal under this bill. An additional restriction that was in the bill that was taken out very recently was the fact that you could not gain access to medical cannabis within 90 days of first seeing a physician unless you had a terminal illness. Now, understand, if you look at the definition of terminal illness, it means that if the disease that you have and left in its current form would result in your death in 1 year. Now, maybe that makes sense, but here's the point. The state legislature has no right, no moral authority, and no aptitude to be able to regulate a pharmaceutical grade product at this level. And they've created restrictions on it that are unique only to cannabis and do not exist for more dangerous drugs. And let me give you an example. I walk into my doctor's office, a doctor I've been with for 4 years, who determines that I have a disease that falls within the scope of the medical marijuana law. He can write me a script because he's been my physician for 4 years, and which is obviously more than 90 days. However, as I pointed out, or was pointed out to me by a very good friend of mine who works in Tallahassee that works with a lot of legislators, sometimes when you have cancer like he does, you need immediate treatment. The problem is, under the current construct, there is a real question about whether or not an individual who's now discovered that they have a serious disease and is now recently treating with a physician who needs access to cannabis immediately to deal with issues associated, for example, with chemotherapy, that they're not going to be able to gain access to it. And that's because we're allowing medical decisions to be made by state officials and legislators. That is not the virtue of limited government and market capitalism that most Republicans want to talk about. I also want to address the obvious privacy problems associated with this bill. Let me explain to you now how it is you get access to cannabis. First, you have to go to your doctor, and the doctor has to be licensed to offer you this prescription. Now, understand, that same doctor, in all likelihood, could write me a prescription for opioids like hydromorphone, OxyContin, or any of the other, or Vicodin, for example, just brand names of opioids, or what I call American heroin. They can write me a script for a pound of opioids, and I can get them at any marketplace on most street corners in America, either by a CVS or Walgreens or any other major drugstore. But if I want to gain access to medical cannabis, what happens is the doctor will tell me that he's going to be submitting, or he or she is going to be submitting a prescription, but it's not given to me. What the doctor does is the doctor has to send that request to Tallahassee and identify who I am and give private, pertinent medical information to the state of Florida. Then the state of Florida decides whether I met the requirements and then sends me an email asking me to disclose additional personal, medical, and financial information. And then if I meet those requirements, then they will send me a card in a couple of weeks. I have, unfortunately, a diagnosis that falls on the approved list. When I got my application, after a government official approved it and after they reviewed my private financial and medical information, then I was allowed the ability to go to a local dispensary and purchase the item that I just showed you. But understand, that exercise took me between 3 and 4 weeks. And I still, even after 2 months, do not have my card. I simply have an email that I was able to show to the dispensary to permit me to gain access to medical cannabis. Does that feel good to you? Does the idea that we are saying to the people of Florida that we believe that the legislature knows more about how you can consume cannabis? Now, if Florida was the first place in the United States to be addressing this issue, I could understand trepidation, concern about injury. But the truth is, medical cannabis has been legal since 1996 when California adopted medical cannabis and is now found in 2 out of every 3 states in the United States. And the problems associated with them have been nominal. In fact, most people have discovered that data suggests a decrease in crime, a decrease in opioid addiction, and that overall, a greater sense of health by the individuals that are consuming cannabis in healthy ways under the supervision of their physician. The very idea that this bill represents the will of the people is in error. It does not. A majority of the states have medical cannabis. In the state of Florida, 71% of the people voted to adopt it. 67 out of 67 counties in the state of Florida, by a majority vote, voted for Amendment 2. 64 out of 67 counties voted for more than 60% in favor of Amendment 2, which was the threshold to pass it as a constitutional amendment. I dare say there has never been an issue in the state of Florida that has this level of support. There is virtually no other social or economic issue presented to the Florida legislature that has had this strong of will of the people. Personally, I believe I'm going to be looking for the legislators that support an overly restrictive bill that, in my opinion, violates my constitutional right under Amendment 2 to gain access to medical marijuana. I very much encourage the legislators that we're going to be sending this video to reconsider their current process, because all that's going to happen with the current bill that's making its way through the legislature is that someone is going to file a constitutional challenge to it, and no one benefits from that, except the fact if you're against medical cannabis, you win, because that's going to add years to the ability of the people in Florida to gain access to it, which means that we will continue to be separated from the will of the people. We will be separated from a majority of Americans that believe the criminalization of cannabis is an antiquated idea that began on a basis of economic and social racism back in the 1930s. It needs to be eliminated, and we need a bill that responds to the will of the people. I'm your resource. You've got questions? Call me. Ted Corliss, News Munchies. Be well.